Pat Garrett's death, the untold story. Have you ever wondered why some lawmen never escape the shadows they create? Pat Garrett became famous for killing Billy the Kid, but that single gunshot may have sealed his own fate. His story is full of feuds, betrayals, and secrets whispered for over a century. Was he a hero, a traitor, or something in between? How did the hunter of outlaws become a hunted man himself? And what unanswered truths still hide behind his death? Hold on, because you'll discover secrets and new facts about Pat Garrett that few people ever hear. Have you ever wondered if killing a famous outlaw could actually curse the man who pulled the trigger? Pat Garrett's name is forever tied to Billy the Kid. Most people know him as the sheriff who ended the Kid's run in 1881, but few stop to ask, what did that act do to Garrett's own life? Did the lawman become a hero, or did he mark himself for death? Garrett was born in Alabama in 1850. His family moved west after the Civil War, like many others chasing new beginnings. By the time he reached New Mexico, Garrett was already toughened by ranch work and hunting. He was tall, sharp-eyed, and had the kind of presence that made men listen. But was he really a man of the law, or just another gun with a badge? That's a question still asked today. In the late 1870s, New Mexico was torn apart by the Lincoln County War. Cattle barons, merchants, and hired guns clashed in bloody fights for control of trade. Billy the Kid emerged from this chaos as both a villain and a folk hero. Garrett, by contrast, chose the side of law and order, or so the newspapers said. But law in frontier New Mexico was a thin line at best. Many sheriffs were as ruthless as the men they hunted. By 1880, Billy the Kid had broken out of jail, killed deputies, and embarrassed the territorial government. People were desperate for someone to stop him. Garrett ran for sheriff of Lincoln County on the promise he would hunt the Kid down. He won, and almost immediately set out with a posse to track him. Did Garrett see this as his duty, or was he chasing the fame that would come from killing the West's most wanted man? The chase took months. Garrett captured the Kid once in December of 1880, only to see him escape in a daring breakout from the Lincoln County Jail. During that escape, the Kid killed 2 deputies. By April 1881, newspapers described him as a phantom, uncatchable, almost supernatural. Garrett swore he would not fail again. He rode with men who knew the Kid's movements, closing in step by step. On July 14, 1881, Garrett found the Kid at Pete Maxwell's ranch in Fort Sumner. The details of that night remain debated. Garrett claimed the Kid entered a dark room, asked, "Who is it?" and Garrett fired, killing him instantly. But some locals insisted Garrett ambushed an unarmed man. Others claimed the Kid never died at all. Do you see how even the most famous gunshot of the Wild West leaves us with questions? The killing made Garrett famous overnight. Eastern papers praised him as the man who rid the territory of a menace. Yet in New Mexico, reactions were mixed. Some saw Billy as a symbol of resistance against corrupt elites. In those circles, Garrett was not a hero, but a traitor who shot a friend in the dark. This divide would shadow him for the rest of his life. Garrett tried to cash in on his fame. He co-authored a book titled The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid in 1882. The book painted him as a fearless lawman who defended order, but critics noted it stretched the truth. Some claimed Garrett exaggerated his role, turning himself into a larger-than-life figure. Was he trying to secure his legacy, or to justify what many saw as a cold-blooded killing? Ironically, Garrett's career after the Kid's death was rocky. He ran for office several times, but often lost, in part because New Mexicans distrusted him. In 1896, President Cleveland appointed him collector of customs at El Paso. Even then, his enemies accused him of corruption and favoritism. The man who killed the Kid could not escape scandal. Have you noticed a strange pattern? Many Wild West lawmen who killed famous outlaws ended up ruined themselves. Wyatt Earp was chased out of towns, while Bill Hickok was shot in the back, and Pat Garrett never found peace. Was this a curse, or just the way frontier justice devoured its own? By the turn of the century, Garrett was more rancher than lawman. Yet the shadow of Billy the Kid never left him. Wherever he went, people asked about that night in Fort Sumner. Some praised him, others spit at his feet. A man who lives under such a cloud cannot rest easy. One story from Garrett's later years shows this bitterness. At a dinner, someone toasted Billy the Kid as a hero. Garrett exploded, slamming his fist and shouting that the Kid was a murderer. Witnesses said the anger seemed to consume him. What does it say when the hunter is haunted more than the hunted? Looking back, Garrett's life proves a strange truth about the West. Killing an outlaw could bring you fame, but not peace. Instead of being remembered as a respected sheriff, Garrett is remembered only for one thing: the night he shot a young outlaw in the dark. And here is the mystery that lingers. By striking down the kid, did Garrett unknowingly sign his own death warrant? Was that single gunshot in 1881 the spark that set his enemies plotting? In the next part of this story, we will ride with Garrett on his final journey near Las Cruces and see how the lawman who killed the kid met his own violent end. Stick around, because that trail holds more twists than you might expect. Have you ever wondered how a lawman's life could end on a dusty road, far from glory, with more questions than answers? Pat Garrett's last ride near Las Cruces in 1908 was supposed to be a simple trip. Instead, it became a mystery that still puzzles historians. Was his death a random ambush, a planned murder, or even justice served by men who hated him? Let's follow his final trail. By 1908, Garrett was no longer the strong sheriff who killed Billy the Kid. He was older, worn down, and struggling to hold on to land and money. Ranching in New Mexico was tough. Drought, debts, and disputes left him vulnerable. He had also made powerful enemies over the years. Ranchers, gamblers, politicians, and even old allies had turned against him. Can you imagine living every day surrounded by people who might want you gone? On February 29, 1908, Garrett set out from Las Cruces with a man named Carl Adamson. They were traveling to look at land near Oregon, New Mexico. Adamson was a known associate of Wayne Brazel, a young cowboy renting land from Garrett. Brazel claimed he wanted to graze goats on the property, which angered Garrett and nearby ranchers. Cattlemen despised goats, believing they destroyed grazing land. Small as it sounds, this feud lit the fuse for what came next. The official story says that as Garrett and Adamson rode together in a buggy, they stopped on a lonely stretch of road. Garrett stepped down to relieve himself. At that moment, shots rang out. Garrett was struck in the head and chest, dying instantly. Adamson claimed he did not see the killer. It was as if the lawman who killed Billy the Kid had been erased in seconds. But who pulled the trigger? Suspicion quickly fell on Wayne Brazel. He admitted to shooting Garrett, but claimed it was self-defense. According to his story, Garrett reached for a shotgun during a heated argument. Brazel said he fired first to save his life. It sounds simple, but does it really fit? Eyewitnesses were absent. Adamson's account was vague. Some argued Brazel was covering for another man, or that he was set up as a scapegoat. Brazel was arrested and brought to trial. In April 1909, a jury acquitted him. Locals cheered the verdict. Some historians believe the trial was a farce, designed to protect powerful men. Others think Garrett had simply lost so many friends that no one cared enough to seek justice. Imagine that. A sheriff who once stood tall as a hero left with no one to defend his name. Now here is where the mystery deepens. Some researchers argue Carl Adamson himself may have been the real killer. Adamson was riding right beside Garrett when the shots rang out. He had ties to Brazel and to political figures who wanted Garrett silenced. But strangely, Adamson was never charged. Instead, he faded into the background while Brazel took the spotlight. Why would that happen unless there was something bigger at play? Another theory points to political enemies. Garrett was about to testify in a land fraud case tied to the powerful Fall family, which later became infamous during the Teapot Dome scandal. If Garrett had spoken, he might have exposed corruption worth fortunes. Could it be that his death was not about goats at all, but about silencing a dangerous witness? Even the weapon raises questions. Reports said Garrett carried a shotgun that day, but some accounts suggest it was unloaded. Others claim he never reached for it. If true, then Brazel's self-defense story falls apart. Yet no clear evidence was ever presented. In fact, much of the investigation seemed rushed, sloppy, and half-hearted, almost as if the town wanted the whole affair forgotten. Consider this irony. The man who shot Billy the Kid, ending a legend, died in a way that created a legend of its own. His body was left by the roadside, later recovered by authorities. Newspapers gave brief reports but avoided probing too deeply. Why did the press, so eager to glorify his earlier deeds, turn silent now? Historians who study the case today remain divided. Some believe Brazel's account, seeing Garrett as a hot-tempered rancher who finally pushed too far. Others see a clear assassination, carried out by men in power who needed him gone, and still others suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. But here is the haunting part. Garrett's death was never fully solved, and it probably never will be. Too many records are missing, too many witnesses are gone. All that remains are scraps of testimony, conflicting stories, and the chilling fact that a legendary lawman was gunned down without real justice. What would you have thought if you lived in Las Cruces back then? Would you have sided with Brazel, the young cowboy who claimed fear for his life? Or would you have whispered that the lawman who killed Billy the Kid was silenced by something bigger, something darker? One thing is certain. Pat Garrett's last ride showed how the Wild West did not always reward its so-called heroes. Instead, it chewed them up and left their stories half-told. His death still echoes today, raising more questions than answers. Later in this story, we will dig into those questions. Who truly had the motive to kill Pat Garrett? And why did the courts let his accused killer walk free? Stick around, because the theories surrounding this murder are as tangled and dangerous as the frontier itself. Who do you believe? The cowboy who admitted to the shooting, or the locals who swore he could not have acted alone? The official story of Pat Garrett's death names Wayne Brazel as the killer, but when we peel back the layers, we find gaps, contradictions, and suspects who never stood trial. Let's step inside the courtroom and the streets of Las Cruces to see how the tale unfolded. Right after Garrett's body was found in February 1908, suspicion fell on Wayne Brazel. He was a young ranch hand, barely in his 20s, with little money and less power. Yet he quickly confessed to pulling the trigger. His explanation was simple. Garrett had threatened him during a land dispute, reached for a shotgun, and forced Brazel to defend himself. At first glance, it seemed straightforward. But was it really? Brazel's confession raised eyebrows. He admitted to killing a man, but showed no sign of panic or guilt. Instead, he acted calm, even cheerful. Witnesses noted he seemed protected, as if someone powerful had assured him the trial would go his way. That alone should make us wonder, who was standing behind this cowboy, guiding his steps? Then came Carl Adamson, Garrett's traveling companion that day. Adamson was with him when the shots rang out. Yet he claimed he saw nothing, heard little, and could not say who fired the gun. Imagine being in a buggy with a man one moment, and the next he lies dead, and you recall almost nothing. Does that sound believable, or does it sound like a man hiding the truth? Some locals whispered that Adamson himself fired the fatal shots. His ties to Brazel were well known, and he had connections with politicians who resented Garrett. But curiously, Adamson was never arrested or charged. Instead, Brazel alone stood trial. How could the only eyewitness be dismissed so easily? Could it be that Adamson's influence made him untouchable? At trial in 1909, the prosecution presented Brazel's confession and argued it was murder, yet the defense flipped the script. They painted Garrett as a bully, a violent man who reached for his shotgun. In this version, Brazel was the victim, forced to act or be killed. Remarkably, the jury accepted this story. After a short deliberation, Brazel walked free. Why did the jury side with Brazel so quickly? One reason was Garrett's reputation. By 1908, he was no longer admired as the hero of Lincoln County. Many in New Mexico saw him as arrogant, greedy, and tied to corrupt politicians. He had enemies among cattlemen, ranchers, and businessmen. When the defense called him a hot-tempered rancher who went too far, locals nodded. They believed it. Another reason lies in the evidence, or lack of it. The supposed shotgun Garrett reached for was never proven to be loaded. Some reports say it was empty, others that it was not even within his reach. If Garrett never posed a threat, Brazel's claim of self-defense collapses. Yet the jury ignored this. Why? Perhaps because the outcome had been decided long before the trial began. Historians later noted strange details. For example, the lead defense attorney was a close ally of the Fall family, a powerful clan tied to shady land deals. Garrett had been preparing to testify against them in a fraud case. Was it coincidence that the same family's allies ensured Brazel's freedom, or was it a clean cover-up hidden behind the mask of a courtroom? The acquittal sparked cheers in Las Cruces. Townsfolk celebrated Brazel as if he had slain a tyrant. That reaction tells us something important. By the end, Garrett was not seen as a lawman who kept order. He was seen as a relic of the past, a man clinging to power, despised by many. When he died, the town turned its back on him. But should we accept the jury's verdict as truth? Many modern researchers say no. They argue Brazel was too weak, too young, and too poor to have killed Garrett on his own. Instead, he was a pawn, put forward to take the blame while the real conspirators stayed in the shadows. Adamson, land barons, and even national political figures have all been suggested. What do you think? Was Brazel simply a frightened cowboy who struck in desperation, or was he the perfect fall guy for men who needed Garrett gone? The trial leaves us with more questions than answers. The official story feels neat, but the details are jagged. One thing is clear: justice was not served that day. A man was dead, and the court shrugged its shoulders. The verdict silenced the investigation, shutting the door on other suspects who might have faced real scrutiny. Once Brazel walked free, the case was effectively closed, and the shadows grew thicker. This is where the myth and mystery collide. Lawmen were supposed to bring order, but in Garrett's case, the law itself may have been bent. It raises a chilling question: how many other frontier trials ended not with justice, but with convenient lies? Garrett's death marks a turning point. It showed that even famous sheriffs could be swept aside when they stood in the way of powerful men. And it also revealed how fragile truth was in the Wild West. If the official story cannot be trusted, then every version of the past must be questioned. Later in this story, we will dive into the deeper theories, from land feuds to political conspiracies, and ask who really wanted Pat Garrett silenced. Stick around, because the suspects are more dangerous than you might think, and their motives cut to the heart of frontier power. Who really wanted Pat Garrett dead, and why did the killer strike on that lonely road? The trial told us Wayne Brazel pulled the trigger, but few historians believe that story holds up. When we dig deeper, we find a nest of motives ranging from land disputes to national politics. Each theory paints a darker picture of how power worked in the Wild West. Let's walk through the leading suspects and ask which one sounds most convincing to you. The first and simplest theory is the goat dispute. Wayne Brazel rented land near Garrett's ranch to graze goats. Cattlemen hated goats, claiming they ruined the grass and spoiled the range. Garrett opposed Brazel's herd, and tempers flared. According to Brazel, Garrett threatened him, and the shooting was the result. This makes sense on the surface. Two ranchers, one conflict, one fatal ending. But does a quarrel about goats explain the suspicious silence of Carl Adamson or the quick acquittal? The second theory is revenge for Billy the Kid. Some believe that supporters of the Kid never forgave Garrett. Fort Sumner, where Garrett shot the Kid, was filled with people who admired the outlaw. Over the years, Garrett faced insults, threats, and cold stares. It is possible that someone waited decades to settle the score. Could Brazel have been a front for old allies of the Kid, carrying out the vengeance long promised? The third theory involves land fraud and politics. At the time of his death, Garrett was preparing to testify in a high-profile case. He had knowledge of shady land deals tied to Albert Fall, a powerful New Mexico politician. Fall would later be disgraced in the Teapot Dome scandal, one of the worst corruption cases in American history. If Garrett had spoken, he might have exposed schemes worth fortunes. Does it sound far-fetched that men tied to Fall decided Garrett had to be silenced before he opened his mouth? Here's where it gets even more suspicious. Carl Adamson, the man riding with Garrett when he was shot, was linked to Fall and his allies. Adamson claimed he saw nothing, but many believe he was part of the plot. Why else would the only eyewitness escape any real questioning? And why else would the court so quickly clear Brazel while ignoring these ties? Another theory points to financial trouble. Garrett was in deep debt, desperate for money. He had borrowed heavily and sold land under questionable terms. Some believe his creditors wanted him out of the way. His death would allow them to seize his property or cancel obligations. In the rough world of ranching, debts were often settled not with banks, but with bullets. Could Garrett have been eliminated by men who preferred profit to patience? A more personal theory involves his reputation. Garrett was known as a man who made enemies easily. He was blunt, proud, and often insulting. Over time, even his allies grew tired of him. One account tells of Garrett mocking powerful ranchers at social events. When you embarrass men with money and guns, you invite disaster. Some argue Garrett's death was not the result of one feud, but of years of arrogance piling up. Let's not forget the strangest idea of all, that Garrett's death was staged. A few have claimed he did not die that day at all, but faked his own death to escape debts and disgrace. These stories have little evidence, but they show how much confusion surrounds the case. When facts are thin, myths grow tall, and Garrett's end has more myths than most. So, which theory stands strongest? The goat dispute explains motive but fails to explain protection. Revenge for Billy the Kid explains hatred but not timing. Land fraud explains both motive and cover-up, with powerful allies pulling strings. Financial debts explain danger but not courtroom silence. Arrogance explains resentment but not the coordinated outcome. Perhaps the truth is a mix, a blend of land feuds and political fears, tied together by men who wanted Garrett gone. What makes this murder so compelling is not just the act itself, but the silence that followed. A lawman killed, a cowboy confessed, and yet almost no one pressed further. It feels less like justice and more like a performance. A neat story presented to cover a messy truth. Think about this. When powerful men want a problem removed, they rarely step into the street with a gun. Instead, they find someone willing to take the blame. Wayne Brazel may have been that man, standing in for forces far greater than himself. The court gave him freedom, and in return the bigger names stayed hidden. For us today, the Garrett case shows how fragile truth was in the Old West. Legends painted lawmen as untouchable heroes, yet in reality, they were pawns in games of land, money, and politics. Garrett's death stripped away the myth, revealing the raw power struggles beneath. But here is the hook we must hold. Despite all these theories, no final answer has ever been proven. Garrett's killer remains a ghost, his motives a question mark. Did goats, revenge, or greed drive the bullet? Or was it the hand of politics itself? In the next part of this story, we will explore modern investigations, documents, and forensic clues that continue to shed light on this unsolved case. Stick around, because the search for truth did not end in 1908, and new discoveries keep this mystery alive. Have you ever wondered why some murders refuse to stay buried? Pat Garrett's death in 1908 should have been an open and shut case. Yet more than a century later, researchers still argue over who really killed the sheriff who shot Billy the Kid. Modern investigations, documents, and forensic reviews have only deepened the mystery. Let's walk through what has been uncovered and why the case remains unsettled. One of the most striking discoveries came in the 1990s, when historians began re-examining court documents from Wayne Brazel's trial. The records revealed just how thin the prosecution's case had been. Witnesses contradicted each other, evidence was poorly handled, and the timeline was shaky. It was as if the trial was designed not to find truth, but to produce a quick acquittal. What does it say when the paper trail looks more like a cover-up than a search for justice? Researchers have also dug into Carl Adamson's background. Remember, Adamson was the only eyewitness, yet he claimed to have seen nothing. Modern historians traced his ties to Albert Fall, the powerful New Mexico politician later disgraced in the Teapot Dome scandal. This link adds weight to the theory that Garrett's murder was connected to land fraud and corruption. Does that sound like coincidence? Or does it sound like politics reaching for the trigger? Forensic analysis has raised more questions. Garrett was shot in both the head and chest, a precise and brutal act. Some experts argue that the wounds suggest an ambush rather than a heated argument. If true, Brazel's story of self-defense falls apart. But without the body, which was buried quickly, no modern autopsy could be done. The evidence that might have closed the debate was lost forever. Another thread involves the shotgun Garrett supposedly reached for. Some reports said it was found unloaded, others said it was not even within reach. Modern researchers point out that the inconsistency could not have been ignored in a fair trial. If the gun was empty, then Brazel lied. Yet the jury brushed past the detail. Why would they ignore the key question that could prove or disprove self-defense? In recent years, genealogists and writers have tried to track the lives of Brazel and Adamson after the trial. Brazel lived quietly, never facing trouble again. Adamson drifted but avoided scandal. Some say this proves their innocence. Others argue it proves the plan worked. The fall guy stayed silent, and the real conspirators went on untouched. Do you see how even their silence feeds the suspicion? Local oral history adds another layer. Families around Las Cruces passed down stories claiming Brazel was not the shooter. Some say Adamson did it. Others whisper that hired killers carried out the deed. While oral history is not hard evidence, it reflects a community unwilling to accept the official tale. When the people closest to the event doubt the verdict, can the rest of us accept it? Modern writers have also noted how quickly the press dropped the story. Newspapers that once hailed Garrett for killing Billy the Kid now gave his death little attention. Few editorials called for deeper investigation. This silence looks strange, unless editors had reasons not to stir the pot. Was the press pressured, or had Garrett's reputation fallen so low that his death was not worth defending? Even the way Garrett was buried adds to the mystery. His funeral was small, his legacy uncertain. Today his grave lies in Las Cruces, often visited by tourists, yet overshadowed by the grave of Billy the Kid in Fort Sumner. The outlaw became the legend, while the lawman became the footnote. Isn't it ironic that the man who claimed victory in life lost the battle for memory in death? Historians today remain divided. Some argue the goat dispute really was the cause, pointing to Garrett's temper and financial troubles. Others insist politics and land fraud were the true motives, hidden behind Brazel's confession. And a few cling to the revenge theory, believing the ghost of Billy the Kid's legend reached out one last time. Which version do you find most convincing? The unanswered questions keep piling up. Who really fired the shots? Brazel, Adamson, or someone else? Why did the jury ignore evidence? Who silenced the press? Why did powerful names hover around the case, but never face trial? Each question leads to another, and the trail twists away into shadows. What makes this case so haunting is not just the killing, but what it says about justice on the frontier. Lawmen could enforce order on others, but when they crossed powerful interests, the law did not protect them. Garrett's death reminds us that the West was never about clear heroes and villains. It was about survival, power, and silence. And here we close the loop. The lawman who became famous for killing Billy the Kid did not escape his own violent fate. Instead, he left behind a mystery that no jury, no historian, and no investigation has solved. Even with modern tools, the truth hides in missing files, lost evidence, and the silence of men who took secrets to the grave. So ask yourself this: was Pat Garrett killed over goats, debts, or politics? Or was he simply a symbol of how the West consumed its own? Until a new discovery appears, we may never know, but the debate keeps him alive, proving that sometimes death does not end a story, it only makes it more powerful.